grab a cup of coffee and start your Sunday with Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life features stories to inspire, motivate, and empower you. Live your best life now. Listen, learn, think, and decide. Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. Every Sunday morning at 9 on the Talk of New York, AM 970, The Apple. Visit CYACYL.com.
This is Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. I'm Joan Herman, and our guest today is author, speaker, life coach, Dr. Joan C. King. Dr. King's life has been an incredible story of change. She went from being a Dominican nun to a neuroscientist to a professor of medicine at Tufts University. Dr. King's work is based on the blending of science and spirituality. She teaches about cellular wisdom and has authored the Cellular Wisdom book series. Welcome to the show, Dr. King. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Joan. It's my delight to join you.
Dr. King, your life has been you've had such a willingness to change. Everything that you've done exemplifies the spirit of change.
Yes.
At age 17, you entered the convent as a Dominican sister, and I'm Catholic, so I understand what that meant to you at that point in your life. And when did you receive this call, and when did you believe that that was your life path?
Well, what was so interesting is I was dating a guy at the time. His name was George, and George wanted 11 kids. And I also was considering, I'd gone to Catholic schools all my life, and so I really wanted the essence of life. I wanted to be able to touch the real substance of life. And as I watched the Dominican sisters, and as they would prepare the altar for Mass, and as I would see them praying, I thought they were entering into this depth of connection with Spirit. And so I can remember standing in the vestibule of Loyola University Chapel on St. Charles Avenue in New Orleans and seeing the light come through the stained glass window and thinking, this is my calling. This is it. And so I had to decide, George or my calling. And I can remember when I told George I was going, I had this relief. It was like, now I can go do what I'm really called to do.
So you, at that point, interpreted that release, and we'll talk about why I'm mentioning this.
Yes.
You interpreted that as that you were going on the right path.
Yes, that was my signal. I felt this expansive feeling of freedom.
Now, the reason that I'm bringing this up, why did you decide to leave being a sister? And I'm mentioning that because I'm sure that we have so many listeners right now that are on the fence about something in their life, whether it be getting out of a relationship or changing jobs. And I want them to feel that they're not alone, and because this was an extremely difficult decision for you. So how did you come to the realization that that wasn't your path?
Well, what was happening is the first few years I was on this road to perfection. I was going to be the perfect sister. And so I was consumed with doing everything perfectly. And then I finished college, and I was teaching college at Dominican College in New Orleans, and I began to realize that my spirit was not being expanded, but was being restricted.
How did you realize that?
It was like a feeling in my gut that constantly I was being curtailed. Don't do this. You got to do that. Don't do this. You've got to do that. It didn't feel the free, expansive feeling when I first had the feeling of becoming a sister. And I can remember I had this conversation one night, which was really revelatory to me. I was complaining about all the rules and regulations. And I had taken final vows now, vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. And I had taken them like 6 years before. And someone said to me, if you don't like it so much, why don't you leave? It had never occurred to me to leave. I went back to my room that night, which we called a cell, and I jumped around for joy saying, I can leave. I can really leave. I can leave. And the next morning I went and told the Mother Superior I would be leaving.
And Joan, what did you encounter when you made that decision? What did people say to you? Again, because, and I mention this because when people are looking to make these life-altering decisions, sometimes they're met with resistance. So I'm just wondering.
Betcha. My mother said to me, took me 11 years to get used to you being there, and now you're leaving. And friends said, why? I mean, I would get all kind of teaching awards. I taught all the chemistries. So there was nothing obviously out of sync that people would say, well, of course she never fit or something like that. It wasn't like that at all. I looked like I fit perfectly. So people couldn't understand because all of this was interior. It was inside of me.
Right.
I knew that if I stayed, I was going to dry up and die as an individual, and I would become a facade. Did I believe that the God that I believed in wanted me to be crushed or wanted me to live expansively? And even though the Mother Superior, although she didn't say I was going to hell, she intimated it by many, many different statements she made for leaving. And I had to believe, could that be true? I mean, wouldn't Spirit want me to be the fullness of who I am, not crush me? And so what was wonderful about making, and it's the hardest decision I've ever made, was I had to believe the inner voice that said life and love is expansive and creative.
So, Joan, at this point, you followed your inner guidance and you had a tremendous amount of strength and courage to make that first change. And that led you to a new path where you went on to earn a degree in chemistry, you earned a Ph.D. in neuroscience and psychology, and then you worked as a professor, researcher, and a department chair at Tufts University School of Medicine. I mean, to the outside world, you made it, whatever that meant. You had the dream career.
Exactly. And I was chair of the Department of Anatomy and Cell Biology, and I was director of a research center for 3 campuses of Tufts.
And then you gave that up.
Exactly. Now, I had told myself that at the 5-year mark of having done all that, I would reevaluate. And when I reevaluated, what happened was I started to get the same restrictive feeling I had in the convent. I couldn't bring all of who I was into that profession. And so I started to feel crushed by my own success. Again, I asked, would Spirit want me to be crushed or be expansive? And so I took a sabbatical that was a life-changing sabbatical. And I began to write. And in my writings, I went to Monhegan Island off the coast of Maine, and then I went to the Big Island in Hawaii. And the first poem I wrote was, Who's There? If I take away all the titles, all the robes, all the facade of success, who's there?
Now, Joan, wasn't that a time when you spent a great deal of your time reading and meditating? And,
Yes.
and when you learned that silence was an important part for us to turn ourselves inward,
Yes.
and that you say that it's important for us to breathe, and well, to stop and breathe and to check our inner pulse. And why is silence so important for us to realize our inner selves?
Because if you pay attention to what the world is saying to you all the time, by everything around us, by TV and commercials and friends and social pressures, it's, oh, you got to do this, and to be successful you have to look like that, and you're not useful to the world unless you look like this, or you do this, or you attain this, and it's all exteriorly oriented. Nobody's asking, are you thriving when you want to do that? And it's not that any of those things are wrong. They're fine. But we have to be able to thrive in the circumstances that we choose of our lives. I really think we're here to discover the magnificence of who we are.
Well, and Joan, looking at your life, to me, what keeps going through my mind is that you needed to experience being a sister for the spiritual side of your future work, and you
Yes.
needed to experience being a scientist, because what you've done now is you've combined your scientific mind with your spiritual being, and you've developed the cellular wisdom, and the two things that I believe fit perfectly together. And had you not gone through all of that, you would not be doing what you're doing right now.
Absolutely. I do believe that everything in my life has worked together in a way I couldn't see it at the time, but worked together to a wholeness that I'm now able to experience.
And I believe that happens in all of our lives. It certainly has happened in mine. And as you said, as you're living it, you don't see it and you don't recognize it. But when you step back and perhaps, as you advise, you take that sabbatical or you spend some quiet time, then maybe you can reflect and learn these things.
I definitely agree. And I think that this is for everyone. We are on our own individual journeys of self-actualization and realization of the magnificence of who we are. And if circumstances are supporting us in discovering who we are, those are the right circumstances for us. But if those circumstances are making us less than what we are, even if it is in no one else's mind but our own, then I think change is exactly what we should do. Break out of the mold and follow the truth of your own inner guidance.
Joan, tell us, what exactly is cellular wisdom, and how does it differ, if it does, from cellular memory?
Okay. So on my website, cellular-wisdom.com, on the first page, I define it, and I make a point of saying I'm continually redefining it because it's vital. I learn more and more about it myself, and it's something that is unending in its message to us. So I'll tell you how I came to envision it. I studied cells for 30 years, cells in animal cells by various microscopic sophisticated techniques, and also cells that I isolated from animals and seeing them grow in dishes. And one of the things I know is cells know how to thrive. So our default condition is thriving. That's not something exceptional. You know, I used to ask as a teenager, why do I have to go and strive exceptionally? Why can't I be satisfied with what everybody else is satisfied with? It's because I was in tune with my own desire to thrive. So our cells have that desire to thrive. Well, where does that come from? Well, what keeps a cell alive? And that's the flow of life energy. We can't see it, and because we can't see it, we don't really pay much attention to it. But if the flow of life were to stop to us, to ourselves, and to ourselves for a fraction of a millisecond, we would cease to exist. That's how ephemeral life is, and that's how strong life is. That is, it's always coming to us fresh, anew, moment by moment. And I believe that energy is the same energy that caused cells to form in the first place, and that caused cells to learn how to aggregate, how to specialize, and how to form multicellular organisms like us.
So, Joan, is the cell a representation of who we are as a whole person?
Yes, I think so, and that's the message. I think that when I look at the cell and ask for the teachings of how to thrive, I'm thinking about us as an individual thriving. And when I see the cell in the body in relationship to all other cells, I think of us in relationship from intimate to corporate to planetary.
Joan, at this moment, we have to take a break for our sponsors. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life now has a monthly free digital magazine that can be mailed to your inbox or read online at CYACYL.com. Each month, nationally recognized leaders in their fields, such as Joel Osteen, Joan C, Tanya Brown, Ed and Deb Shapiro, Food Network's Robert Irvine, plus many others, provide the tools that you need to inspire and motivate you. We believe in a holistic approach to life, incorporating mind, body, and spirit. As philosopher Francis Bacon said, knowledge is power. Take the wisdom provided in the publication and apply it to your everyday life. Visit CYACYL.com for more information or to begin your free subscription. That's CYACYL.com. Welcome back to Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. I'm Joan Herman, and our guest today is author, speaker, life coach, Dr. Joan C. King. Joan, before break, we were starting to talk about cellular wisdom, and you were explaining that the cells are representations of who we are as a whole person. And what can we learn when we look at the way that cells act? What can we learn about how to live?
Well, the first thing we can learn is cells always engage activities based on their inner DNA. In other words, what a muscle cell does is different than a bone cell, is different than a blood cell, and is different than a nerve cell. Well, why? Each of them is being true to the portion of the DNA that they have specialized in development. So a muscle cell doesn't say, oh, I want to be a nerve cell, because a nerve cell just has a better reputation in the body. Because if it tries to be a nerve cell, it will die. So being true to who we really are is, I think, one of the main messages of ourselves, because bone cells will use exactly the DNA they need and not the DNA, because if you think about it, it's the DNA of one egg and one sperm that makes all of the cells in our body. Then why aren't all the cells of our body the same?
Joan, do you think that we really know what we want, but we're afraid to listen, to tap into our feelings.
That's correct. And that's why I think the silence is so important, because cellular wisdom is pre-verbal. And what I mean by that, it arose before language arose. So it's not like it sits up and tells you, oh, Joan Herman, today you shouldn't be doing this, today you should be doing that. It doesn't do it that way. Mm-hmm. It does it, but you have to be quiet and turn inside and look at your inner landscape. One of the things we're so aware of in our world is everything outside, the outer landscape of our lives. Mm-hmm. But we're not very familiar with the inner landscape. What makes me truly, joyously, deeply happy? What allows me to thrive? What allows me to be the person who I want to be? When I'm with so-and-so, am I being who I really am, or am I trying to be who they want me to be?
Joan, what happens when we look inside and all we hear are those negative voices that we tell ourselves, all the, we're not good enough and we can't and
right.
so forth?
And all of that is bull. Mm-hmm. And so the first thing to say is, thank you very much for the outside voices that I've brought inside of me, but you are not my truth. In my truth, I am a unique expression of life, duplicated by no one else, evidenced by our DNA. Our DNA is so unique, we can put people to death by identifying them. There is no one else like us in the world. And our reason for being here is not just to discover the magnificence of who we are, but to bring it out into the world by the contributions that we make. And if we think we're not good enough, we'll never make those contributions that we were meant to make.
Joan, when we do that on a cellular level, are we rewiring our brain to change our thought patterns? Is it happening physically as well?
We're always rewiring our brains, whether it's for good or not. Our brains are very plastic. And so if you're constantly telling yourself from the time that you get up in the morning, oh, this is going to be a dredge of a day, I'm not good enough, the challenges are going to overwhelm me, I just want to stay in bed, you're setting up a neural network of defeat. You really are physically creating a neural network of defeat. If, on the other hand, you say, I want to get in touch with the magnificence of who I am. I want to know the truth of who I am. I want to be able to bring that to the world. You begin to create a neural pathway of success.
And is that the neural activity, that the loop that you refer to in the book, Cellular Wisdom for Women, when you talk about you have this loop that just starts with a very basic thought, but as you feed into it, then more and more neurons add into it?
That's another neural network that is in the emotional brain. That it has to do with the fact that if you notice, if you get upset by some circumstance and you keep thinking about that circumstance. This isn't the first time it's happened. It's happened before, and, those people really don't respect me. And before you know it, you have worked yourself up into a frenzy. That is the loop of the emotional brain that's meant to do that. Mm-hmm. And it's primitive. It's meant to get animals out of circumstances that would be harmful to them. The problem is we haven't learned how to control that. And the way to control that is the minute that starts is to stop it. Mm-hmm. Because if you don't stop it the minute it starts, you're going to have to stop 100 times or 1,000 times or 1,000,000 times the number of neurons as it has gone around this loop gathering energy. And that is in a more primitive part of the brain, not where thought is, where mm-hmm. emotion is. And that's something we need to learn how to control. We don't have to be at the mercy of our emotions.
Right. And I think that's where most of us spend the majority of our time.
I agree. I think most of us live life reactively mm-hmm. rather than proactively.
And how can we switch from being passive to more proactive?
First of all, by recognizing you have the power to do it. If you're alive, you have the power to live the truth of who you are. And if you are alive, you have access to that cellular wisdom by paying attention to your internal responses.
And as you said, our body does communicate with us, and the feelings, as you said earlier, when you knew that different life paths were not the ones that you were supposed to continue on. It's those feelings. It's that communication. Is it what we know as intuition, or is that what we really need to start to pay attention to, that we really do know what's best for us if we trust it?
Absolutely. And we can call it intuition. I think it's even more than intuition. I think it's at the very ground of our being. It is out of which we live everything. Pay attention when you do something. What is your inner response when you think of doing something? Is it restrictive and tightening? Mm-hmm. When you think of doing it, is it expansive and freeing? Mm-hmm. And start to become sensitive to your own internal responses, because that's how you will know what allows you to thrive.
Joan, in the process of change, once let's say we get to the point where we know we have to make these changes, or we know it's something we want to do, in your book, Cellular Wisdom for Women, you advise seeking input from others.
I do. One of the things the body also teaches that's very important is that cells connect to each other. And if they don't connect to each other, they die. And so reaching out for people who are of like mind at a time when you want to make a change, because when you want to make a change, usually you're bringing forth a part of yourself that maybe you haven't known that much before. And certainly your friends and family haven't known that much before. So they look at it and say, that's not you. Well, that's not the you they knew, but that's the you that you want to bring forth. And so what's important is to get in line with people who understand that and make those kinds of connections, because we are more than we have ever experienced ourselves to be. And there's more of us that we can bring forth. And by being with people that understand that, they're not trying to make you restricted to what you have been in the past.
And Joan, when we start making these changes, how can we recognize the person that we're becoming?
Are you becoming kinder? Are you becoming freer? Are you becoming more expansive about how you think about other people, how you think about the world? Are you becoming more hopeful? Are you becoming more deeply happy? If those are the things that are happening, you're on the right path.
Joan, where can our listeners go to get more information about your work?
www.cellular-wisdom.com. I have a lot of free teleconferences, radio shows, and I have several books and workshops that can be bought, and I also do personal coaching.
And I personally recommend the book Cellular Wisdom for Women. I found that workbook to be very beneficial to me on a personal level, so I thank you for that. And as always, our listeners can visit our website, which is CYACYL.com, which stands for Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. While on our site, please check out our new digital magazine, follow the show on Facebook, and listen to podcasts. Joan, I have very much enjoyed this conversation today. I think that your work is wonderful, and I think that it's just so beneficial to us to try to pay attention to our spiritual side and connect it with the scientific or the physical part of us. So
absolutely. And every week I send out a free Jolt of Joan, a 2-minute recording to help you stay on your path.
So our listeners can get that information again at cellular-wisdom.com.
Yes.
Our guest today is Dr. Joan King. Thank you so much, Joan, for being here. And I look forward to having the opportunity to talk to you again.
Would love to.
This is Joan Herman, and this is Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. Thanks for tuning in.